It was supposed to be a night like any other at the royal family's beloved Sandringham Estate, a quiet retreat tucked into the misty countryside of Norfolk. The house was dimly lit, guards posted at every gate, the kind of stillness that only royalty could afford. But just after midnight, that stillness shattered. A thunderous crash echoed through the narrow country roads, jolting the night guards to attention. And within minutes, flashing blue lights were painting the estate walls in chaos. The royal family was about to wake up to their worst nightmare. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Have you ever had one of those moments when time seems to stop? When the air thickens, the silence screams, and your heart knows something terrible has just happened before your mind catches up? That was Sandringham on that night. The call came through the royal switchboard at 12:17 a.m. There's been an accident. It's the motorcade. And not just any motorcade. It was the one carrying Prince William, the future King of England. The voice on the line was shaking. The words were disjointed. His driver. He didn't make it. Then static. Then silence. In an instant, palace protocol went out the window. Guards sprinted through corridors. Staff were pulled from their beds. King Charles was woken by a pounding on his door. No one knew the full story yet. Only that the Prince of Wales had been in a car crash just outside the estate gates. Within 10 minutes, the Norfolk police and royal protection officers had sealed off the road. What they found was worse than anyone imagined. A Royal Range Rover, twisted beyond recognition, had slammed into an oak tree so violently that its engine had been thrown 20 feet from the wreck. The royal crest, once gleaming on its grille, was embedded deep in the bark. The driver, a man who had served the royal household for over 15 years, lay motionless behind the wheel. He was gone before the paramedics arrived. And Prince William, dazed, bloodied, barely conscious, had to be pulled from the wreckage by his bodyguard. His first words, witnesses say, weren't about himself. They were, "Where's Tom? Where's my driver?" That single question set the tone for what followed. A tragedy wrapped in loyalty, duty, and unanswered questions. Because while the headlines the next morning would say, "Royal Tragedy at Sandringham," the truth was far more complicated. The official statement came quickly, too quickly, some said. The Prince of Wales was involved in a minor accident near Sandringham. He is safe and recovering. His driver tragically lost his life. The family requests privacy. Minor accident? Those who saw the wreckage disagreed. The car had been torn apart. Its rear axle sheared off. Its windows blown out. Witnesses described a scene that looked more like an explosion than a collision. And yet, less than an hour later, palace communications were already framing it as a simple accident. Convenient, perhaps, but suspiciously neat. And that's when whispers began to spread, whispers that something about that night didn't add up. Who authorized that late-night drive? Why was the motorcade leaving the estate after midnight, long after the last scheduled meeting had ended? And why had the car's security tracking system gone offline for 6 full minutes before the crash? 6 minutes that no one could explain. 6 minutes that might hold the key to everything. As dawn broke over Sandringham, the mood inside the estate turned somber. Black sedans lined the gravel driveway. The king and queen arrived before sunrise, both visibly shaken. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, pale and sleepless, was seen clutching her phone, refusing to leave the estate chapel. Behind the calm royal facade, there was panic, questions, fear, and maybe something else, guilt. Because this wasn't just a random tragedy. Not to them. It was personal. The driver who died that night wasn't just an employee. He was family to those who knew him. A man whose loyalty had been unwavering since the days when William was still a university student. His name was Thomas Reynolds. A veteran, a husband, and a father of 2 young children who believed their father worked for a man who helps the king. To lose him in the line of duty, and under such mysterious circumstances, shattered everyone close to the royal circle. By noon, the press had caught wind. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Photographers crowded the outer gates, their lenses trained on the blacked-out windows of Sandringham House. Every journalist in the country wanted to know what really happened on that dark Norfolk road. But inside, behind those closed doors, something even more unsettling was unfolding. William, confined to his room with minor injuries, refused to rest. Those who saw him said his face was pale, his eyes empty. He wasn't speaking much, only asking to see the crash report. He wanted details. He wanted the truth. And when they finally brought him what little they had, he stared at it in silence. The timeline didn't make sense. The route wasn't standard. The road conditions had been fine. And yet somehow, the car had veered off course and slammed into a tree just half a mile from the main gates. Half a mile. That close to safety. And still, something, or someone, had gone horribly wrong. Investigators found no skid marks. No signs of braking. The car hadn't tried to stop, which meant one of two things. Either the driver never saw it coming, or something stopped him from seeing it at all. Could it have been a mechanical failure? A sudden blackout? A malfunction in the motorcade's communication system? Or was it something worse? Eyewitnesses came forward in fragments. A local farmer claimed he'd seen a flash of light moments before the crash, like the reflection of a camera, or maybe something metallic, near the tree line. Another man, walking his dog on the neighboring road, reported hearing not one impact, but two. A smaller sound first, then the thunderous crash seconds later. 2 impacts? Was there something before the collision that no one had mentioned? By the end of the first day, Scotland Yard had taken over the investigation. They promised transparency, thoroughness, and answers. But if history has taught us anything, it's that transparency in royal matters is often just another word for controlled silence. Behind the scenes, tension was building. The king wanted calm. His advisors wanted quiet. But William? He wanted truth, even if that truth hurt. That night, as candles flickered at the gates of Sandringham, tributes from the public, cards, flowers, prayers, William sat alone by his window. Rain streaked the glass. The hum of generators outside filled the quiet. And somewhere deep inside, something in him shifted. He had lost someone loyal, someone good. And part of him knew this wasn't over. But what was he supposed to do? Question the very system meant to protect him? Doubt the people sworn to keep him safe? Challenge his own security detail? He couldn't. Not yet. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone knew more than they were saying. Because the more he replayed the crash in his mind, the less sense it made. He remembered faint details. The faint scent of burning rubber before the impact, the way the headlights seemed to flicker, the brief static on the radio. And one thing that haunted him, Tom, his driver, had looked uneasy that evening. Not frightened, just distracted. William had even asked, "Everything all right, Tom?" Tom had smiled faintly and replied, "Always, sir. Just thinking ahead." Now those words wouldn't stop echoing in William's head. Thinking ahead. About what? About who? And then, there was the final transmission from the car, logged only minutes before the crash. The audio recording was garbled, but one phrase was clear: "We've lost signal on Unit 3. Unit 3, that was the code name for the vehicle William was in. Lost signal. Was it just bad reception in the countryside? Or something else entirely? The Royal Protection Office scrambled to retrieve all surveillance data from the route. But when technicians accessed the traffic cameras, they discovered something chilling. A 6-minute blackout across 3 separate feeds, exactly during the window of the crash. How does that happen on one of the most secure motorcade routes in Britain? Coincidence? Or interference? As night fell again over Sandringham, a quiet storm was brewing. William's mind was turning, connecting dots he didn't yet have proof for. King Charles, meanwhile, was battling his own fears. Not only for his son's safety, but for what this meant for the crown. Every royal death reverberates through history. Every tragedy reshapes perception. The monarchy couldn't afford another mystery on the scale of Diana's. But fate doesn't ask permission to repeat itself. The parallels were too haunting to ignore. A trusted driver, a nighttime crash, unanswered questions, and a grieving prince. Only this time, it was the son who survived. And as the world mourned a loyal man named Thomas Reynolds, few realized that within the palace walls, a deeper story was unfolding. One that threatened to expose cracks within the royal system itself. The official inquiry would soon begin, but not before something unexpected surfaced. A discovery that would throw the investigation into chaos. Hours after the wreck, one of the recovery teams made a strange find in the debris. A charred piece of paper, wedged between the dashboard and the glove compartment. The edges were burned, the ink barely legible. But 2 words could still be made out. Don't wait. Don't wait for what? Don't wait for whom? The handwriting was neat, precise, familiar even. But not the drivers. That small piece of paper would soon become the center of the investigation and the royal family's deepest secret, because someone inside the estate recognized the handwriting. And once they did, everything changed. But before anyone could act, before Scotland Yard could even announce their preliminary findings, another problem emerged, one that would cast new suspicion over the entire royal motorcade. The car's onboard GPS logs had been wiped. Not corrupted, not damaged. Wiped clean. Who had access to that system? Only 3 people. The driver, the head of royal transport, and one senior palace aide whose name had quietly vanished from the staff registry 2 weeks earlier. The moment investigators realized that, the mood shifted from tragedy to suspicion. Was it really just an accident? Or had someone made sure it wouldn't look like anything else? As the royal family prepared for a public statement, their faces somber, their tone measured, behind the cameras, tensions were boiling. William refused to read the pre-written statement. He wanted to speak from the heart. Palace advisors insisted on control, image, protocol. But William knew something that none of them were ready to admit. If he stayed silent, this wouldn't stop. Not for him. Not for anyone under the crown. He turned to one of his closest aides that evening and said quietly, "This doesn't feel like chance. It feels like warning." And as he stared at the wreckage photographs laid out before him, the twisted metal, the missing logs, the burned note, he realized the truth might already be buried under layers of silence, loyalty, and fear. But he wasn't about to let it stay there. It began as an ordinary evening at Sandringham, quiet, subdued, the kind of peace that only comes when the world thinks you're finally at rest. The wind whispered across the open fields, a light drizzle misted over the estate walls, and the hum of the Royal Range Rover idling near the garage broke the silence only slightly. The royal family had wrapped up a private dinner just an hour earlier. It was one of those rare moments when everyone seemed content. William had been unusually relaxed that day. He had spent the afternoon visiting local conservation sites, shaking hands with workers, and even cracking a joke or two. To those who saw him, he was the very picture of composure. A prince preparing for a future he hadn't chosen, but had long accepted. But as the clock approached midnight, something changed. William was still in his study, reviewing documents. His driver, Thomas Reynolds, waited patiently outside, leaning against the car, checking his watch. 15 years of service had taught him the rhythm of the royal household. Every delay, every deviation, every silent cue that something was amiss. When William finally stepped out, the look on his face wasn't one of exhaustion. It was thought. Deep, heavy thought. He muttered a quiet apology for keeping Tom waiting, slid into the back seat, and gave a short nod. "Just the estate perimeter tonight. I need some air." To most, that would seem harmless. A prince wanting to clear his head on a private drive. But inside the tight-knit circle of royal security, there was an unspoken rule: no unscheduled movement after dark without clearance. Especially not with the heir to the throne. Still, William had authority. And Tom, ever the loyal servant, didn't question it. He simply adjusted the mirrors, radioed in the route, and pulled away. The rain picked up slightly as they turned onto the narrow road leading through the Sandringham woods. The headlights cut through the mist, creating ghostly patterns in the trees. Tom's hands gripped the wheel with quiet confidence. He had driven this route hundreds of times. He could have done it blindfolded. But tonight, something about the drive felt different. William noticed it too. The silence between them was heavy, almost unnatural. Usually, Tom would make polite conversation, ask about the day's engagements, mention a football score, share a brief anecdote. But not tonight. Instead, he was unusually quiet, glancing at the rearview mirror more often than usual. William finally broke the silence. "You all right, Tom?" Tom hesitated before answering. "Yes, sir. Just thinking ahead." William frowned. "About what?" Tom gave a faint smile. "About how things can change in an instant." It was an odd thing to say, a strange reflection for a man who rarely spoke in riddles. But before William could press further, the radio crackled with static. A distorted voice came through, followed by a sharp burst of noise. Then, silence. Tom adjusted the dial. "Nothing. Strange," he muttered. "Signal's been fine all week." William leaned forward. "It's fine, Tom. Just the weather, maybe." But the driver's eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. The rain grew heavier. Fat drops splashed against the windshield, creating a rhythmic drumming sound that filled the air. The Range Rover's wipers swiped back and forth like metronomes counting down to something unseen. They were halfway down the long stretch of the A148, barely a mile from the estate gates, when the headlights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. Tom frowned. That's odd. William leaned closer. Electrical issue? Could be. But this car was serviced yesterday. And then came the low beep. A warning light flashed briefly on the dashboard, then disappeared. Do you need to stop? William asked. Tom shook his head. No, sir. We'll be home in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. That's all it would have taken. 2 minutes to reach the estate gates. 2 minutes to park safely. 2 minutes to avoid history repeating itself. But fate had other plans. As they rounded the final bend, something caught Tom's eye, a faint glint on the side of the road. Reflexively, he slowed. The object was small, barely visible in the rain. Perhaps a piece of metal, maybe just debris. But it gleamed unnaturally, reflecting the car's lights like a mirror. Tom squinted, and that's when the radio came back to life. A sharp, sudden voice. Urgent, panicked. Unit 3, do you copy? You're off route. Repeat, you're off route. Off route. That was impossible. Tom had driven this road more times than he could count. He looked down at the GPS screen and froze. The map was blank. No route, no coordinates, no signal. Just static lines where the road should have been. William leaned forward, tension rising in his voice. What's happening? Before Tom could answer, the car lurched. A violent jolt threw them sideways. Tires screeched against wet gravel. The steering wheel locked for half a second, then snapped free. Hold on, Tom shouted. But it was too late. The vehicle spun once, twice, before slamming into the oak tree with a sound that split the night open. Metal crunched. Glass shattered. Silence followed. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. For a moment, there was nothing but ringing in William's ears. The world had gone mute. His body was pinned, his chest heavy. He tried to call Tom's name, but the words came out broken. He turned his head. Tom's hands were still gripping the wheel, unmoving. His face pale. His eyes open but distant. William's breath caught. Tom. No response. He reached forward, trying to shake him, but the seatbelt locked tight. Pain shot through his arm. The sound of rain pelting the broken windshield was deafening now, like applause from a cruel audience. In the distance, he heard sirens. Slow at first, then closer, louder, cutting through the fog. The rest came in flashes. Voices shouting, glass being cut away, hands pulling him from the wreckage. He remembered the feel of cold air on his face, the blur of flashing blue lights, and the voice of one paramedic saying, "The driver's gone." Gone. A word too simple for the man who had spent half his life serving the royal family. By the time William regained full consciousness, he was in the Sandringham infirmary, surrounded by aides and doctors. His arm was bandaged, his ribs bruised. But he didn't care. He only asked one question. Tom? The doctor hesitated, then shook his head. William closed his eyes. The sound of the crash replayed again and again in his mind. The spinning tires, the last flicker of headlights, Tom's final words, thinking ahead. What had he meant? Was it coincidence that he'd said that just moments before everything went wrong? Or had he known something? By morning, investigators were on site. The wreckage was cordoned off, the road sealed. Detectives in fluorescent vests combed the scene for clues. Cameras, drones, and forensic tools captured every detail. But what they found, or rather, what they didn't, raised more questions than answers. There were no skid marks. No sign that the brakes had been applied. The black box, which records vehicle data, was intact, but empty. It had been manually reset sometime in the hour before the crash. And there was that strange metal glint by the roadside. A small shard of chrome, too polished, too deliberate to be random debris. It was bagged, tagged, and taken to the lab. No one could explain how it got there, nor could anyone explain the GPS failure. The entire navigation log for the drive was blank, like it never happened. That day, Scotland Yard officials quietly told palace representatives that they couldn't rule out interference, electronic or otherwise. Someone, somewhere, might have tampered with the car. The revelation was explosive, but it never made the press. Within hours, the palace issued a statement. There is no indication of foul play. The prince's driver died heroically in a tragic accident. Heroically. The word stung. Because William knew the truth, Tom hadn't died a hero. He had died confused, possibly frightened, and surrounded by unanswered questions. And William couldn't let that stand. He asked for access to the internal reports. They told him no. He demanded to see the vehicle logs. Denied. So he started his own quiet inquiry. Not as a prince. As a man who had lost a friend. He met privately with the security director at Sandringham, an old acquaintance, someone he trusted. The man looked uneasy the moment William brought up the crash. "There's something I can't explain, sir," he finally admitted. The motorcade's second vehicle, the backup car, reported a comms blackout at the exact same moment you lost signal. Both cars. Same frequency. Same minute. William froze. Both cars. "Yes, sir. And that shouldn't be possible. So what are you saying?" The man hesitated. "I'm saying this might not have been an accident." The words hit like ice. If someone had tampered with the motorcade, who would dare? And why target Tom, a driver, not a royal? Unless the real target had been the passenger. William's stomach turned. The idea that someone might have wanted to harm him, on royal grounds, under royal security, was almost unthinkable. Almost. Because history had shown him that even in the world of royalty, safety is never absolute. That night, as he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind returned to that final drive. The flashes in the trees, the glint of metal, the flickering headlights, the missing GPS data, and Tom's words, thinking ahead. Could Tom have known something? Could he have been trying to warn him? The following morning, William quietly visited the crash site. Alone. The road was still slick with rain. The tree that had ended Tom's life stood tall, unyielding, a cruel monument to chance or intention, no one knew which. He knelt beside the spot, fingers brushing the damp earth. There, half buried in the mud, was something small, an ID badge. Tom's. It was cracked, scorched, but intact. The security chip on its back was melted, but not completely destroyed. William pocketed it before anyone saw. He didn't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe something deeper. But one thing was certain. This was no longer just about grief. It was about truth. And if the truth meant defying palace silence, so be it. As he walked back toward the estate, a low fog rolled in, swallowing the trees. The estate bells chimed 6 times in the distance. 6 bells. 6 minutes missing from the surveillance logs. Coincidence, or something else? William didn't believe in coincidence anymore. Because even as he returned to the house, clutching Tom's broken ID, he noticed something chilling. One of the estate's CCTV cameras, facing the crash road, was missing its lens cover. It had been removed. Recently. The cables were still warm. Someone had been there. Someone who knew exactly where to look and what to erase. And that someone might still be inside Sandringham. The first sound anyone heard was the crash. It wasn't a simple collision. It was a roar, a violent tear through the calm of the Norfolk night that sent shockwaves down the A148. The air itself seemed to hold its breath before erupting into panic. Then came the silence, a cold, eerie silence that felt heavier than the rain still falling over the black road. At 12:19 a.m., the emergency line in King's Lynn lit up. "We've had a collision on the A148, near Sandringham," came the trembling voice. "A large vehicle, possibly a Range Rover. It looks royal." Those last words set everything in motion. Within minutes, sirens began wailing in the distance. Locals later said the sound seemed to echo forever, a chorus of urgency cutting through fog and fear. The crash site was a scene from a nightmare. The Range Rover's frame was twisted around the massive oak like a ribbon of blackened metal. The front end was completely crushed, its headlights shattered into fragments that glittered like broken diamonds across the wet tarmac. Steam hissed from the engine, mingling with smoke, while the acrid smell of fuel hung heavy in the air. A local farmer named Edward Hughes was the first to reach the wreck. He had been driving his tractor back from an adjacent field when he heard the crash. He stopped, ran toward the lightless wreck, and shouted, "Is anyone alive?" No answer. He peered through the shattered glass and froze. Inside, 2 figures. One slumped over the wheel, the other half-pinned behind a crumpled door. He didn't recognize them immediately, but he could see the unmistakable royal insignia on the dashboard, the gold W stitched into the headrest. Edward's heart dropped. He stumbled back, dialing emergency services again. "It's the royal motorcade," he gasped. I think the prince is inside. For the next 7 minutes, chaos reigned. Police, paramedics, and royal security converged on the scene. Floodlights illuminated the wreck like a stage, casting long shadows that flickered with every movement. Paramedics worked frantically on the driver, but the look in their eyes said everything. Too late. He had taken the full impact, protecting his passenger. William was conscious, but dazed, blood streaking down his temple. His voice came out cracked, disoriented. "Tom, is he?" No one answered him. They couldn't. The medics were too busy cutting through twisted metal to reach him. The prince tried to move, but couldn't. His body was pinned by the seatbelt, his vision blurring. Through the fog of pain, he could hear the radio chatter. Royal accident confirmed. Notify palace security. Secure perimeter. No leaks. And yet, even amid that organized chaos, one thing stood out. The royal convoy that should have been following, the backup vehicle, was nowhere to be found. It took another 4 minutes before it arrived, tires screeching to a stop. The driver jumped out, shouting, "We lost comms." The line went dead. Dead. That word carried weight that night. As medics pulled William free, he reached out, his hand brushing against Tom's arm. Cold, still. His chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to shout, but all that came out was a whisper. "I told you we'd be fine." It was a promise neither of them could keep. Back at the estate, alarms had gone off in the security control room. Monitors flickered between static and blurry camera feeds. The motorcade's GPS tracker, normally a steady blue line, had vanished for exactly 6 minutes, the same window between 12:10 and 12:16 a.m. Then it reappeared, right before the crash. One of the operators, a veteran named Stevens, stared at the screen in disbelief. "That's impossible," he muttered. "You can't lose all 3 feeds at once unless—" He stopped himself. "Unless someone pulled them." The moment the system came back online, the crash alert flashed red across every screen in the room. The call to Buckingham Palace was made immediately. It reached the king's private secretary within 2 minutes. Charles was awake before the end of the call. The man who had buried one driver after his ex-wife's death now faced the prospect of another. At the same moment, the queen consort was being briefed in another room. Her first words were a whisper, "Not again." By 12:40 a.m., the scene on the A148 had turned into a controlled frenzy. Emergency lights painted the road blue and red, reflecting off the wet pavement. Reporters were already trying to make their way past police cordons, sensing something big. But what struck investigators most was what they didn't see. No tire marks. No signs of braking. No obstruction. The Range Rover had simply left the road at full speed, as if guided by invisible hands. One detective, bending over the wreckage, noticed the driver's seatbelt still locked tight. "He never even tried to get out," he said quietly. "Whatever happened, it happened fast." Nearby, forensic techs were collecting fragments of the shattered headlight. One of them found something odd. A small circular mark on the glass, perfectly symmetrical, as if something had hit it moments before the crash. "Impact from what?" another asked. The tech looked up. Could be a drone. Could be something else. By 1 a.m., the body had been removed. The medical examiner covered Tom Reynolds with a white sheet. Rain began to fall harder, pattering softly against the fabric. One paramedic paused before lifting the stretcher and whispered, "He saved him." He took it all. Back at the command post, the head of royal protection was on the phone with Scotland Yard. "We've got anomalies all over," he said grimly. GPS interference, communications failure, visual blackout. Either this was one hell of a coincidence, or someone planned it. There was a long pause on the other end. Then a single word: investigate. The world would wake up in a few hours to headlines screaming royal motorcade and fatal crash. But inside the royal system, those words meant something far darker. The cover-up began almost immediately. Orders were given to restrict photographs, confiscate footage, and silence first responders. Edward Hughes, the farmer who had discovered the wreck, was escorted away by 2 officers who told him, "You saw nothing tonight." His phone was taken and returned hours later, with the photo gallery mysteriously empty. Meanwhile, the backup car driver was brought in for questioning. His story was shaky. "We lost all comms," he said. "Just static. No visuals. Then nothing." "What frequency were you on?" the investigator asked. "Secure royal channel." "Then how did both channels fail simultaneously?" The driver looked confused. "They can't. That's the point of redundancy. Exactly. They can't. By sunrise, the wreck had been removed. The oak tree stood scarred but unbroken, its trunk now wrapped in police tape. The road was hosed down, the last trace of oil and glass washed away. To passing locals that morning, it would look as though nothing had happened at all. But inside the estate, the air was thick with tension. William hadn't slept. He sat in silence, a blanket over his shoulders, replaying the night in his mind. Every sound, every flicker of light. He could still hear the static on the radio, the faint flash near the trees, and Tom's final glance. That unreadable look that now meant everything. He asked to see his security detail. When they arrived, he didn't waste time. What caused the crash? He demanded. Preliminary assessment says hydroplaning, sir. Wet road, reduced visibility. Hydroplaning, William repeated. On a road I've driven my whole life? With one of the best drivers in the country? The officer didn't answer. William's tone sharpened. Show me the logs. The man hesitated. They're incomplete, sir. Incomplete. GPS went offline. Data's missing from the black box. How much? 6 minutes. William leaned forward. The same 6 minutes we were out of communication? Yes, sir. The silence that followed was suffocating. When the officer finally left, William stared at the empty space where Tom used to stand every morning, waiting beside the car with that same faint smile. He felt something he hadn't in years. Not fear, but doubt. Doubt in the people meant to protect him. He reached for the folded note he had kept from the wreckage, the charred one with the words, "Don't wait." He hadn't told anyone about it yet. Not even Catherine. It wasn't the time. But the handwriting haunted him. He couldn't place it, but it stirred a memory. Someone inside the estate. Someone who had access to royal documents. Someone close. Later that afternoon, the king arrived at Sandringham. His face was pale, his expression weary. When he entered William's room, neither spoke at first. Finally, Charles said, "You're lucky to be alive." William nodded. Tom wasn't. Charles sighed. He was a good man. He'll be honored properly. William looked up sharply. Honored? He deserves more than that. He deserves the truth. Charles met his son's eyes. And the truth will be found. But not in public. William's jaw tightened. You think this can be contained? It must be, the king replied. The crown cannot endure another spectacle. Not after. He trailed off. They both knew who he meant. Diana. The ghost neither of them ever truly escaped. William's voice softened. And if this wasn't an accident? Charles looked away. Then we'll deal with that when we must. Until then, silence protects us. William leaned back, exhausted. Silence protects no one, father. Not anymore. As the king left the room, William turned to the window. Rain still fell softly over the estate. Down below, he could see the press gathering at the gates. Cameras flashed like fireflies. The world wanted answers, and he was trapped behind a wall of secrecy. He pressed his hand against the glass, watching the raindrops streak down. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he could still hear the echo of tires skidding, or maybe not skidding at all. That night, a storm rolled in, the kind that made the old windows rattle and the trees bend under the wind. William lay awake, eyes open, listening. At one point, he thought he heard something outside, footsteps on gravel. He sat up, staring into the darkness. Nothing, just the rain. But when he checked the next morning, he found footprints, fresh, distinct, leading from the garden path to the edge of the woods. Who had been there in the middle of the night? He alerted security, but they brushed it off. Probably staff, sir. We've had extra personnel since the crash. He didn't believe them. Something about those prints, the spacing, the direction, they weren't from a casual stroll. They were from someone who'd been standing still, watching. As he stared at them, a chill ran through him. Whoever had caused that crash hadn't finished what they started. And as the investigation deepened, one phrase from the report would soon send a new wave of panic through the palace. Unidentified figure observed near the crash site, last seen moving toward the woods. The man in the woods. Thomas Reynolds wasn't born into privilege, but he had always believed in duty. It was the one value that had guided him through everything. The army, marriage, fatherhood, and eventually, his quiet, loyal service to the royal family. He was the kind of man you didn't notice at first glance. A steady presence, not loud, not flashy, but reliable in a world where reliability was a rare thing. To the outside world, he was simply William's driver. But inside the royal circle, Thomas was something more, a confidant, a protector, a man who carried not only the prince's safety, but often his peace of mind. He knew William's moods, his silences, his subtle tells. He knew when to talk and when not to, when to joke, when to give space. He had been there through every storm, Diana's inquest, Harry's departure, Charles's ascension. He had driven through protests, rain, and quiet heartbreak. And now, the man who had dedicated 15 years of his life to service had come to rest beneath a white sheet, his name reduced to a headline: Royal driver dies in Sandringham crash. But the truth of who Thomas was, and what he might have known, was far more complicated. The morning after the crash, his wife, Margaret Reynolds, woke up to the sound of a knock on the door. She thought it was the post. Instead, two officers in dark suits stood on her porch, hats in hand. One of them spoke softly, carefully rehearsed. "Mrs. Reynolds, there's been an accident." Her knees buckled before the second word. The officers didn't need to say more. She knew. She just didn't want to believe it. Margaret was escorted to a waiting car and taken to the hospital. There, in a sterile white room, she was shown her husband's ring, the same gold band he had never taken off. That was how she confirmed it was him. She didn't need to see the body. She couldn't. Later, as she sat alone with a blanket draped over her shoulders, a royal aide entered quietly. He expressed condolences, spoke of Thomas's loyalty, his bravery, promised that the palace would take care of everything: funeral expenses, education, funds for the children. A statement from the king. But when Margaret asked the one question that mattered, how did it happen? No one gave her an answer. "They're still investigating," the aide said gently. Yet even as he spoke, his eyes flicked to the door, as if he wasn't supposed to say more. That was the first time Margaret felt it, that creeping suspicion that something was wrong. Because Thomas had always been careful. Obsessively so. He checked routes twice. Never drove without clearance. Never sped. Never deviated. And above all, he never took unnecessary risks. So how did a man like that end up dead half a mile from the estate gates? Back at Sandringham, William sat in the private chapel. The air smelled faintly of candle wax and lilies. A framed photo of Tom had been placed near the altar, smiling in his driver's uniform, the royal crest glinting faintly on his shoulder. For William, it was personal. This wasn't just another staff tragedy. This was a friend, a man who had been there in moments of vulnerability, offering quiet words that often meant more than grand speeches. He remembered once, years ago, after an especially brutal press storm, Tom had said something that stuck with him. "Sir, storms don't last forever, but they do show you who can stand the rain." And Tom had stood every rain beside him. Until this one. Catherine found William in the chapel hours later. She sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. "You haven't eaten," she whispered. "I can't," he said. She glanced at the photo, then at him. "He loved serving you." "I know," William murmured. "Which is why I can't understand how this happened." Catherine hesitated. "You think it wasn't an accident?" William turned to her, eyes tired but sharp. The logs were wiped. The cameras went dark. And someone was in those woods, Kate. Someone was watching. She didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Outside, mourners began gathering near the estate gates. Flowers piled up by the minute. Roses, lilies, notes that read things like "a loyal servant," "a man of honor," "gone too soon." But amid the public grief, another story was beginning to unfold in private. Thomas's brother, Mark Reynolds, had received a message the day before the crash. It was a simple text from Tom, sent at 10:43 p.m. "Keep the kids close." Might be away longer than expected. Mark didn't think much of it at first. Tom sometimes worked extended hours. But the phrasing felt odd. Away longer than expected. Away where? When news of the crash broke, Mark reread the message a dozen times. It didn't sit right. He tried to reach the number Tom had used, but it went straight to voicemail. Later, he learned that the phone had never been recovered from the wreck. It wasn't listed among the retrieved personal effects. A driver's phone. Missing. That was enough to make Mark suspicious. And when he shared this detail with investigators, it quietly disappeared from the report. Meanwhile, at Scotland Yard, the initial accident analysis was already being revised. The early claim of hydroplaning no longer held up. Tire analysis showed perfect traction, even on wet pavement. Mechanical inspection revealed no brake failure, no steering defect. So if the car was fine, the road was fine, and the driver was fine, what caused the crash? One line in the internal report caught the attention of the lead detective. Possible electronic interference with onboard navigation and communication systems. Source unknown. Electronic interference. The same kind used in targeted signal jamming. But who would jam a Royal Motorcade systems? And how would they know when to do it? That question sent quiet panic through the ranks of Royal Protection. Because if someone could breach that level of security, it meant they weren't dealing with random vandals or rogue paparazzi. It meant coordination. Back in London, the palace released a brief public statement. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales mourns the loss of his trusted driver and friend, Mr. Thomas Reynolds, who served the crown with dedication and loyalty for over a decade. The royal household extends its deepest sympathies to his family. But behind closed doors, another statement circulated internally, one that would never reach the public eye. It read, "Pending full investigation, internal security protocols will remain classified. No further comment should be made regarding the cause of the incident. All communication with external media must go through Central Command." Translation: silence. At Tom's funeral, held 5 days later, the royal presence was understated but heartfelt. William arrived quietly, dressed in black, head bowed. Catherine followed, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. There were no cameras allowed inside, though a few still managed to capture the moment William helped carry the coffin. During the service, the priest spoke of loyalty and sacrifice. Thomas Reynolds was a man who served with humility. He never sought recognition, only to do what was right. But it was William's eulogy that broke the silence. Standing before the small crowd, his voice calm but trembling, he said, "Tom wasn't just my driver. He was a friend. He carried me safely through storms, some on the road, some in life. And though he's gone, his kindness will drive us forward." Margaret sobbed quietly in the front pew. When it was over, the family was escorted to a private reception. A senior royal aide approached Margaret again, handing her an envelope. "The palace would like to ensure your comfort," he said softly. "We're deeply sorry." Inside was a check, generous, but not enough to quiet a conscience. She thanked him, but said nothing. That night, as she sat by the window, she opened Thomas's old briefcase, the one he carried on every shift. Inside was his notebook, a few receipts, and something strange, a folded sheet of paper marked confidential. The handwriting was neat, unmistakably his. It read, "If anything happens to me, tell Will not to trust everyone inside." Margaret froze. Tell Will not to trust everyone inside. Inside what? The palace? The estate? The circle of security? She wasn't sure what it meant, but one thing was clear. Her husband had been afraid. She called Mark immediately. When she read him the note, he told her, "Keep it safe. Don't show anyone yet." But by then, someone was already watching her house. A black car had been parked down the street since morning. She thought it was press. But when she approached later, it was gone. No tire marks, no trace. Meanwhile, back at Sandringham, William was in his office, staring at a file. The preliminary investigation summary. And one sentence in particular. Evidence suggests unauthorized presence near crash site approximately 5 minutes before collision. Unauthorized presence. A figure had been spotted, tall, wearing dark clothing, carrying something metallic. No identification. No trace after the impact. The report described it as likely coincidence. William didn't buy that. He turned the page. The final line chilled him. Object recovered near impact zone. Unidentified electronic component. Under forensic review. He picked up his phone. "Get me Scotland Yard," he said. But before the call could connect, another line rang through. An internal one, private, secure. A voice, low and familiar, said only this: "Don't ask questions over the phone." Click. The line went dead. William sat back, his pulse racing. Whoever that was, they knew what he was doing. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Rain began to fall again, tapping against the window. Somewhere out there, someone had taken Thomas Reynolds' life, and they weren't done yet. Because 2 days later, another member of the royal staff would vanish without a trace. And the last message that person sent was eerily similar to Tom's. "Keep the kids close. Things are changing." When the royal motorcade crash first broke on national television, the tone was eerily calm, too calm. The BBC anchors spoke in measured voices, the graphics understated, the words carefully chosen. There has been a serious incident near the Sandringham Estate involving the Prince of Wales's official vehicle. Buckingham Palace confirms His Royal Highness is safe and recovering from minor injuries. Minor injuries. That's how they described a collision that had torn a car in half and taken a man's life. But behind the polished words and public composure, Buckingham Palace was a war zone of chaos, fear, and frantic secrecy. The first few hours after the announcement were a blur. Phones rang nonstop. Aides were pulled from their beds. The Royal Communications Office became a command center. Lights blazing, papers scattered, the faint smell of coffee mixing with anxiety. Inside the private quarters, senior officials gathered around the conference table, whispering in tense, clipped tones. "We can't let this spiral," said one advisor. "Not now. Not with the King's health under review and the Commonwealth tour weeks away." "But this isn't a small matter," another shot back. "It's the heir to the throne. A royal driver dead. The optics alone are catastrophic." Their voices rose, echoing through the marble halls. At the far end of the table sat Sir Malcolm Price, the head of royal security, a man with the calmness of stone and the eyes of someone who'd seen too much. He didn't speak for several minutes, just stared at the folder in front of him. When he finally did, his voice was low but heavy with authority. "This wasn't an accident," he said. The room fell silent. "What are you implying?" asked one of the communications officers nervously. "I'm saying," Price replied, "that someone knew their route, timing, and vulnerabilities. The GPS logs were wiped, the cameras glitched, and the vehicle's communication system went down simultaneously. That doesn't happen by chance." The head of media frowned. "Are you suggesting sabotage?" "I'm suggesting interference," Price corrected. "Until proven otherwise." No one dared speak after that. Meanwhile, at Sandringham, Catherine was in the royal infirmary, watching over William. His face was pale, his eyes sunken from sleeplessness. But his spirit, that stubborn, relentless determination, hadn't wavered. When Price arrived that afternoon, William didn't bother with greetings. "Tell me everything," he demanded. Price hesitated. "Sir, it might be better if we wait until—" "No," William interrupted, his tone sharp. "Now." Price nodded, opening his briefcase. "The investigation confirms several anomalies. Communications were jammed for exactly 6 minutes, the same period during which your vehicle's black box reset. The source of the interference hasn't been identified. Jammed how? Either electronically or manually. We're still determining which. The systems are encrypted. To break through them would require insider-level access." "Inside," William repeated quietly. "You mean someone from within?" Price didn't respond, but the silence said enough. Catherine looked between them, her voice trembling. "Are you saying someone in the palace could be responsible?" Price's jaw tightened. "I'm saying whoever did this new royal protocol intimately. They knew the timing, the route, the frequency. That narrows it down considerably." William leaned forward, anger rising beneath his calm exterior. "Then find them." Price nodded. "We will. But, sir, you need to understand. If this goes public, it won't just be a scandal. It will be a crisis." William's eyes hardened. "Let it be a crisis, then." Later that evening, the king arrived by helicopter. The sound of the blades thundered over the estate like a storm breaking apart the night. He was escorted through the halls by guards, his face pale under the harsh lighting. When he reached William's room, the tension was almost visible. They spoke privately, but those nearby could hear raised voices, father and son divided by duty and truth. "You can't start a witch hunt inside the palace," Charles snapped. "The public must never suspect instability within the family." "This isn't about perception," William countered. "It's about justice." "Justice won't bring him back," the king said sharply. "No," William replied. "But silence won't stop the next one." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rain beating against the windows. Then Charles's voice softened. "You think I don't understand loss, William? You think I don't know what it means to watch someone you care about die because of that damned road, that damned attention?" William stared at him. "Then help me fix it." The king sighed, the weight of the crown pressing visibly upon him. "I can't let you make this a public crusade." "Not yet." William said nothing. He didn't need to. The rift between them was already forming, quiet but deep. Outside the royal walls, the media frenzy had reached fever pitch. News vans camped outside the gates. Drone footage of the crash site spread across social media, despite efforts to suppress it. Hashtags like #RoyalCrash and #JusticeForTom were trending by nightfall. And in that growing noise, small details began slipping out. Whispers from anonymous sources close to the royal household, claiming the crash might not have been accidental. It was enough to send Buckingham Palace into full panic mode. An emergency meeting was called at 10 p.m., attended by key aides, the Prime Minister's liaison, and members of Scotland Yard. They gathered in the palace's secure conference suite, a room shielded from electronic surveillance. Phones were banned. Every word spoken there would remain unrecorded. "This cannot reach Parliament," said one senior advisor firmly. "If the Crown is seen as compromised, we risk a constitutional tremor." The Yard's representative cleared his throat. "With respect, sir, you can't bury evidence of possible sabotage. Not when it involves the heir to the throne." The room erupted into murmurs, half outrage, half fear. "Who would even benefit from something like this?" asked the Home Secretary's aide. "A political faction? Foreign interest? A rogue royal insider?" Sir Malcolm Price leaned forward, sliding a photograph across the table. "We found this near the crash site. A footprint, size 11, standard military issue. Mud composition matches the Sandringham forest. Whoever was there wasn't local." A heavy silence followed. "Do we have a match?" the King's secretary asked. "Not yet," Price replied. "But we will." Back at Sandringham, William couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Tom's face. Calm, steady, unaware of what was about to happen. He got out of bed, pulled on a coat, and walked outside into the cold night. The estate was eerily quiet. The rain had stopped, but the air smelled faintly of wet leaves and diesel, the kind of scent that lingers after tragedy. He wandered toward the stables, the last place he'd seen the man in the woods, according to security logs. A single lantern flickered inside. For a moment, William hesitated. Then he stepped inside. The smell of hay and damp leather filled the air. The horses shifted uneasily as he entered, their movements restless. Something about the silence felt wrong. He looked around, nothing but shadows and tack gear hanging neatly on the walls. Then he noticed it, a footprint. Muddy, half-dried, right by the door. It was the same size and shape as the one found near the crash site. Before he could react, a voice behind him said softly, "You shouldn't be here, sir." He turned. It was one of his security officers, a man named Howard, one of Price's trusted men. William steadied his breath. "I could say the same about you." Howard's expression didn't change. "We're increasing patrols." "The King's orders." William studied him for a moment. "You were on duty that night, weren't you?" Howard nodded. "I was." "Then why didn't your vehicle respond when mine went dark?" Howard hesitated. Comms were down. William stepped closer. "For 6 minutes?" Howard's jaw tightened. "That's what the report says." "But what do you say?" A pause. Then, quietly, "I say someone made sure we couldn't respond." William's eyes narrowed. "And you know who?" Howard shook his head. "Not yet. But if I were you, sir, I'd watch who's watching you." He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing against the wet cobblestone. William stood there for a long time, staring at the single muddy print by the door. The palace was in panic, yes, but panic wasn't the right word for what was coming. Panic fades. What was settling over the royal family now was something colder. Paranoia. Because if an attack had come from the outside, it could be defended against. But if it had come from within, from someone trusted, someone close, there was no wall strong enough to keep it out. The next morning, Catherine found William in the garden, sipping tea that had long gone cold. She sat beside him, pulling her shawl tighter. "They're saying the press might start publishing leaks," she said softly. "Unnamed sources, unverified stories. But it's spreading." William didn't look up. "Let them talk." "Talk about what?" He finally met her gaze. "About what they don't know yet. Which is," he leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper, "that the man who died wasn't the only target." Catherine froze. "What do you mean?" William's expression was unreadable. "I think someone wanted to send a message. Tom just happened to be in the way." "Do you know who?" "Not yet," he said. "But I will." That night, as darkness fell again over Sandringham, another call came through the palace line. No ID, no voice, just static, and then, faintly, a whisper. "You're next." The line went dead. For the first time, the future King of England felt a chill that went deeper than grief. It was fear, the kind that doesn't fade with daylight. The royal investigation was supposed to be straightforward. A crash, a mechanical failure, a tragic loss. But then came this 6-minute gap, 6 minutes erased from every camera, every GPS tracker, every communication line connected to the motorcade. It was as though time itself had folded and swallowed that sliver of night whole. For investigators, that blackout was the problem that couldn't be ignored. For the palace, it was the problem they couldn't allow to exist. By dawn, Scotland Yard's digital forensics team had been granted access to the estate's security network, or rather, to what remained of it. When they plugged in, the first thing they noticed wasn't what was missing. It was what was replaced. A blank feed. 6 minutes of static. Not darkness, not corruption, static. Which meant the cameras had been deliberately looped. One technician muttered, "This wasn't a malfunction." Someone spliced the feed. The room went silent. The official in charge, Inspector Darius Holden, leaned forward. "Explain. See the interference pattern? That's a manual loop insertion. Someone fed old footage back into the live feed. Probably to cover their movement." Holden frowned. Movement of what? Whatever caused the crash. At that exact moment, in another wing of Sandringham, William was holding the same report in his hands. The words blurred on the page as anger surged through him. Manual interference detected. Source unknown. He dropped the papers onto the table. "They're not saying it, but this was planned." Catherine sat across from him, her eyes red from exhaustion. "Then by who?" "The police, the guards, someone inside." "That's the question, isn't it?" he replied. Everyone inside the palace had access, but not everyone had reason. Outside, the sky was iron gray, the air sharp with winter's chill. Scotland Yard vans lined the driveway. Reporters were being kept at bay, but rumors were seeping through the cracks, whispers of foul play, sabotage, betrayal. To the public, it was still a tragic accident. But inside Sandringham, panic had curdled into paranoia. By mid-morning, Inspector Holden and his team had compiled a rough timeline. 11:53 p.m., motorcade leaves Sandringham. 12:10 a.m., GPS signal drops. 12:11 to 12:17 a.m., complete blackout across 3 security feeds. 12:18 a.m., emergency call logged from local resident. 12:19 a.m., impact confirmed. It was those 7 minutes, particularly the 6 between signal loss and the call, that no one could account for. One of the analysts, a woman named Lorna Tate, noticed something odd. The interference didn't start from the vehicle side, she said, pointing to the data logs. It started from the estate network itself. Holden frowned. "You're saying it was triggered internally?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. The command originated from a secure line registered to a royal network node." "Which one?" She hesitated. "Palace command room." That changed everything. Holden stood. "You mean to tell me this blackout came from inside Buckingham?" "Yes, sir. From a terminal assigned to a level 3 clearance officer. There were only 4 people in the entire royal network with level 3 clearance, and one of them had retired 2 months earlier. His name was Stephen Hargrove, former head of logistics, dismissed quietly after a disagreement about security budgets. The same man who had installed the vehicle route encryption system still in use that night. When Holden brought this to Sir Malcolm Price, the head of royal security went pale. Hargrove shouldn't have access anymore. His credentials were revoked. Then why did his login initiate the blackout? Price didn't answer. Later that afternoon, the 2 men met in the king's private study. Charles listened, motionless, as they explained. "So, a former employee somehow accessed the royal network to trigger a security breach that led to my son's near death?" Charles asked quietly. "Yes, Your Majesty," Holden said. "That's our working theory." The king's hands trembled slightly as he poured himself a glass of water. "Find him." Price nodded. "We will." But when they did, the story grew darker. Hargrove's London flat was empty. No signs of forced entry, but everything inside was untouched. Clothes still folded, wallet on the table, food in the fridge. Only one thing was missing, his laptop. The landlord said he hadn't seen him in over a week. "Left in the middle of the night," he said. "Didn't even take his coat." A note was found on the kitchen counter, scrawled hastily. "They're watching. I was just the switch." It wasn't signed. That phrase, Just the switch echoed through the corridors of power for the next 48 hours. Who was they? What was he switching? Back at Sandringham, William was pacing the study when Sir Malcolm entered. "Hargrove's gone," Malcolm said. William turned sharply. "Gone where?" "Vanished. Left a note. No trace since." William clenched his fists. "You think he did it?" "I think he helped someone who did." William stared at him for a moment, then walked to the window. The wind was howling through the trees. The same trees that lined the road where Tom had died. "Then we find out who." Malcolm nodded. "We're already tracking his contacts. There's one more thing you should know." "What?" "The system logs show Hargrove's access point wasn't direct.